One spring camp practice in the books. Pitt was in the South Side yesterday for their first practice of spring camp, so we had to, we were obviously there to watch as much as we could with the media, and we got plenty of observations that came out of that. Plus, a big game for Pitt tonight as the Panthers take on Florida State at the Peterson Event Center. One of next to the penultimate regular season game as Pitt looks to build its NCAA tournament resume. A must-win game tonight. Apologies to those of you who make fun of me for saying games are must-win, but in terms of the NCAA tournament chances, Pitt absolutely has to win this game or else they will have to win the ACC tournament. So, no pressure, just don't lose. We got a lot to talk about here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's Tuesday. It's the Morning Pitt. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak. The website is Panther-Lair.com. The YouTube channel is youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And yeah, I think that's all the declarative statements we need to get this one started here. You know what we always ask you to do? Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. We have these daily Morning Pitt videos that we run every day of the week, Monday through Friday. We have our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 p.m., but I'm checking here real quick. We might have to push that back to 8:30 tomorrow night. I'll let you know for sure what time we're going to be live tomorrow night. A little bit of a conflict there with a crucial 5th grade basketball tournament game. We don't want to have any overlap with that. So I'll make sure you know when we go live. We will be live. Of course, we also do live post-game shows after all the road basketball games. So none of those this week, but we'll be live after every ACC tournament game next week, however many of those there are. And then whatever the future brings after that, maybe after Selection Sunday, we'll have an NCAA, or we'll have a live stream. And then if Pitt makes the NCAA tournament, we'll have a live stream then. We'll do live streams all over the place because they're always fun and everybody likes to hang out and talk about what's going on, especially on the post-game shows. We've got at least a few of those left after the season ends. And then we have interviews and press conferences here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We have practice highlights. We got video of the quarterbacks from the first practice in spring camp yesterday. That's up on the site on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. Of course, we have a lot of it over at Panther-Lair.com as well, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. Find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out and talking about Pitt sports on the website, on the message boards, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. All right, first day of spring camp yesterday. What did we learn? What do we find out? What do we know about Pitt after one practice of spring camp, or more relevantly, one media viewing window of about 35 or 40 minutes of spring camp? Well, I told you yesterday that you don't really learn anything out of all of spring camp, and that's especially true on the first day of camp. NCAA rules, they don't let you wear full pads on the first day of spring camp. I think they have to go like 3 days before they can finally get the full pads on. So yesterday's practice was in shorts and jerseys. They had helmets on, and that was about it. So you're really limited in terms of hitting. You're limited in terms of the physicality of football. And as you might have heard, or may or may not be aware, football is a very physical sport, not when you're practicing without pads. However, when you're learning a new offense, you're installing a new offense, and particularly one that's going to operate at a certain tempo like Pitt is right now, having some non-pad practices isn't the worst thing in the world because you're just trying to master the mental side of things. You want the quarterbacks to know exactly what they need to be doing. The offensive line needs to be fully in check and cohesive. And then all the skill guys have to be able to get the signal, get lined up, and get ready to snap the ball in 10 seconds or less, if that's how fast they choose to go at that particular point. So it's not the worst thing to have these non-pad practices at the beginning of spring camp when you're learning a new offense. Ultimately and eventually all of these coaches want to have hitting and physicality and contact so they can, simulate what a real game is going to be like. But these early going, it's okay. And you can get some things down. You can get your, wide receivers can work on running routes. Offensive linemen can work on some of the sort of, technique things that aren't necessarily quite as physical, but they're important as well. And the same thing with the defensive lineman. Every position group has something it can do when, they're not hitting, when they're not in full pads. For those of us on the sidelines, we can watch quarterbacks throw a football. And for They have 5 scholarship quarterbacks. We've seen 2 of them playing games. The other 3 we haven't seen playing games. One guy is a guy who just graduated high school 2 months ago. The other 2 guys were true freshmen last year, redshirted. One of them did so here. The other one did so at Alabama. So we really haven't seen anything from those 3 guys, basically ever. But obviously Nate Yarnell and Christian Veer have a lot of experience. We saw a lot of them playing last year, and we have some idea of who they are. You add to the mix Eli Holstein, Ty Diefenbach, who was here and redshirted last year, and then Julian Duggar, who enrolled in January after graduating from Penn Hills. And the first thing that stands out with the quarterbacks, I'll be honest, and it was the first thing I noticed. So when we first, when they let the media into practice, we walk in and they're stretching, right? Pretty thrilling stuff. Play fast, stretch faster. But you don't stretch faster. You stretch slower because you need to be fully stretched out. It looked to me like they stretched the same. No changes there. There were some changes in practice and the way practice was run and some of the different drills they did, but the stretching was the same despite all the coaching turnover. But when we walk walk along the sidelines while the team is stretching and you're kind of just looking at the players, just glancing over, what jumps out at you? And one of the first things that jumped out was all the guys in red jerseys are really tall. And that may seem like, wow, you're a real moron. I can't believe I'm sitting here watching this video for you to tell me that the quarterbacks are tall. But it's notable. It's notable to see those guys, particularly the 5 scholarship quarterbacks standing there because, look, like Christian Veer and Eli Holstein and Julian Duggar are not small by any stretch of the imagination. They're not short at all. But standing next to Nate Yarnell and Ty Diefenbach, they look short. Which is remarkable because those guys are probably a solid 6'3", like Veer and Duggar and Holstein. 6'2", 6'3". I mean, they're good-sized guys. But they look small compared to Yarnell and Diefenbach because those guys are just both like 6'6" or something like that. And the height of the quarterbacks really stands out when you consider that that's probably, like in terms of average height of scholarship players, the tallest position on the team. On this year's roster. And I'm not exaggerating about that. And that says a lot about the quarterbacks, but it says a lot about the rest of the team, too. If you read my write-up after practice yesterday, I harped on size a lot. And I can't help it. I'm not going to go over it every day when we write about practice. I'm not going to, when we talk about the team here during, these Morning Pitt episodes or on a live stream or something like that, I'm not going to bring this up every time, but you can't entirely ignore it, that this team is not particularly tall. The quarterbacks are big. The offensive line is tall. Other than that, outside of a few guys here or there who have some decent size, it's not an overly tall team. And, that's whether you look at the defensive line, they're not really that big. Now, I think you can make up for height on the defensive line with a few other things like speed, quickness, explosiveness, and those were certainly things that Charlie Partridge prioritized. I assume Tim Doust is going to be all over that as well. I mean, he doesn't have a choice. He has to play with the guys he's got, right? But it certainly looks like the defensive tackles are in the mold of some of the guys who have been very successful here in the past, some of those undersized defensive tackles. I think that's who Charlie Partridge was trying to recruit, and that's what this unit is largely built of right now. And so Tim Doust is going to have to make it work with those guys. And you can win with speed. You can win with quickness, explosiveness. When we talked to Francis Brew a couple weeks ago, the freshman defensive tackle who's not a big guy, he said, you've got all these big offensive linemen, but you always talk about getting low, playing with leverage and getting low in order to get leverage. Well, I already have that, and it's going to be pretty hard to block a guy who's that much shorter than you. I mean, we'll see. It's an interesting theory by Francis Brew. We'll see if it comes to pass, but that's sort of what the whole defensive tackle area is built on right now at Pitt. That's what their roster looks like. There are not a lot of tall guys, and there isn't much height in the defensive end room as well. And you just kind of look around. I mean, the DBs aren't all that big. There's some decent-sized linebackers. A guy like Solomon DeShields is pretty impressive. Rasheem Biles, Jordan Bass, those guys have good size. Braylon Lovelace looks like he's ready for a big season this year. But that's about it from the defense. And you go over the offense, there's just not a lot of size at wide receiver. like Kenny Johnson, Dejon Reynolds. These are your tallest scholarship wide receivers. Their tallest receivers are actually two, I shouldn't say two walk-ons. Jake McConaughey went on scholarship last year, and then Caden Smith from Franklin Regional is a walk-on. And those guys are the tallest. They're listed at like 6'4", and when you look at them standing out there, they're about as big as it gets. The guys that they added, Sincere Lee and Raphael Williams, I mean, they're like, if you want context, if you want a comparison point for something you've seen before or someone you're familiar with, Chewabuko, they're the same height as him. And so these were the additions this offseason. That was how they boosted the wide receiver room. In addition to getting, Kenny Johnson to return, they boosted the wide receiver room by adding those two guys who don't bring a lot in terms of height. Now, height is not everything, particularly maybe in this offense especially. It's you need to be fast. You need to be able to turn your hips. You need to be able to be explosive. And those things are all very important, but height is good too. So that was one of the first things that stood out. But going back to the quarterbacks for a second, one thing I can't figure out with Nate Yarnell, and maybe you guys have thoughts on this, is what's the best way to start this? I feel like he just can't get any respect. I just don't think he can. He just doesn't seem to be getting respect. And I think there's a lot behind that. But I mean, when we talk about him, we talk about, Yarnell is named the QB1 to open spring camp, but the competition's open. The depth chart is not set. It's moving up and down, but he's the guy who will take the QB1 reps. I think at one point we even on the live show or on the Morning Pitt said somebody has to line up and take the first rep at quarterback, so it's going to be Nate Yarnell. Why disrespect like that? And Pat Narduzzi kept saying things yesterday when we talked to him of he's the guy to start spring camp. And even when we would ask Narduzzi questions, when you told Nate that he would be the guy to start spring camp, not that he's the guy, not that he's the QB1, not that he's the first team quarterback, but that he's that guy to start spring camp. And so you add that little caveat on there just to make sure everybody knows it. It's not set in stone. He could very much lose that job. He could be replaced. And I'm not saying he can't. And I'm not saying you need to come out and declare a day one starter right now. You don't need to do that at all. But it's more of a vote of confidence than we've heard Narduzzi give quarterbacks in the past at this point. But at the same time, when it comes with those caveats and almost disclaimers, it's sort of, I don't know, it undercuts it a little bit. And I don't entirely understand why. I know everybody wants an open competition, but I think even if Narduzzi said Nate Yarnell is our number one quarterback right now, or not the right now part, if Narduzzi said Nate Yarnell is our number one quarterback, I think everyone would understand that if somebody else outplays him, they will jump ahead of him. So I don't know why we do that with Yarnell, because ultimately he earned this spot. I think he earned this spot with how he played in the last two games last season. When he finally got his opportunity, he played well. And that's been the reality with Nate Yarnell. Every time he's gotten his opportunity, he has played well. The disrespect for Nate Yarnell didn't just start this spring. It started last summer. Maybe earlier than that. Nate Yarnell was never getting an opportunity from the previous offensive coaching staff. He wasn't. And that's evidenced by, the path they took. That Phil Dracovic had to be so bad that he was costing them games before they would finally bench Dracovic. And then Christian Bear had to be so bad or commit so many turnovers that he was costing them games before they finally went to Nate Yarnell, who all he did was protect the football, throw some touchdowns, and generally be pretty efficient at leading the team. But it took two other guys flaming out for him to even get that opportunity. And I mean, Pat Narduzzi had he had sort of his usual comments yesterday. I've seen him be a leader for years. You guys know I don't make that decision. Well, maybe it's time to make that decision, because if you knew that Nate Yarnell was going to be a good option dating back years, he should have been starting last year, sooner than the final two games, and maybe as early as the second or third game, maybe the beginning of the season. But Nate Yarnell just can't get any respect. And maybe he'll lose the starting job to one of these other guys. Maybe Veyer will pass him. Maybe Diefenbach. Maybe Holstein. Maybe Julian Duggar. who I liked how he threw the ball yesterday. I thought he looked pretty comfortable out there. He was pretty athletic. In his throwing motion, I was like, well, he looks pretty good. So maybe Nate Yarnell will lose the job, but he's never done anything to not put himself in this position. You know what I mean? Like, Nate Yarnell has been pretty good every time he's gotten the opportunity, and sometimes with a limited playbook, and sometimes not. Last year, I think he averaged more than 10 yards per attempt. And that might actually be over the course of his career, he averaged more than 10 yards per attempt. I feel like he's done enough to merit a little bit more confidence, a little bit more respect, and a little bit more sort of decisiveness from the coaches about where he stands. But nevertheless, the other, watching them throw yesterday, I think Yarnell and Veer looked like the guys that we saw during the season last year. Like I said, I liked how Julian Duggar threw. I really did. I'm still saying the odds are against him working his way too far up the depth chart. I think a redshirt is probably most likely for him, but ball looked nice coming out of his hands. He looked athletic and smooth as he was throwing. I think he's a good quarterback prospect, and I'm really intrigued to see where, what this season is for him, what spring camp is for him, what the summer is for him, and what the season is for him, and then what his future holds. Because I think there's some tools to work with there, and I have to think Cade Bell is excited about, working with those tools and helping him develop. Holstein, just looks like a really solid, well put together guy. He's got a little bit of a hitch in his throw, but the ball still gets to the receivers for the most part. There was some shakiness yesterday. During the part that the media got to watch, there were some drop passes, there were some off the mark throws. But by and large, the ball got there. Same thing with Diefenbach. Obviously, like I said, he's got that size, which is pretty impressive. I mean, he's really big, and also has a baseball player background, so he's got a pretty good arm. It's a good group of quarterbacks. I think what needs to emerge, and here maybe I'm engaging in some more Nate Yarnell disrespect, but what needs to emerge is somebody who can show that they can take over a game and put the team on their back and really lead them down the field. And maybe that is Yarnell. I don't know that he's necessarily gotten an opportunity to do that yet, but they need, out of a group of 5 scholarship quarterbacks, all with pretty good physical tools, pretty good size, pretty good arms, a little bit of mobility. Each of them can kind of move around a little bit to varying degrees. Somebody's got to emerge as that guy who has a great grasp of the offense, can operate it, stay cool under pressure, and make those throws and carry the offense down the field. And we'll see. Once it gets live, and I mean the quarterbacks are not going to be live during spring camp, but once they get into scrimmage situations where they're trying to mount those drives, where they're going tempo and trying to get down the field in less than 2 minutes or whatever it is, the coaches will get an idea of who can really kind of run it. And that'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. Just a couple minutes left. Big game for Pitt tonight. Panthers take on Florida State at home. Florida State's 9-9 in the ACC, which is a game behind Pitt right now. There's this group of for about 8 teams that all have 8 to 12 wins right now, which is basically Pitt at 10-8. There's 7 teams, on either side of them who could, anywhere from, like I say, 8 to 12 wins, who could leapfrog Pitt if Pitt loses out and these teams win 2, or fall behind Pitt if Pitt wins out and these teams lose 2. And there's some interesting matchups coming up here. I mean, Pitt and Florida State, it's a 9-9 team against a 10-8 team. Obviously Pitt and NC State will close. They're in that group. Both teams are in that group. They'll close the regular season at the Peterson Event Center on Saturday. Wake Forest hosts Clemson on Saturday. That's a big game for Pitt. Both of those teams right now are 10-8. Clemson's going to play Syracuse tonight, actually, at home, which is a big game. Syracuse is 11-8. It's Syracuse's finale. Their off week is the last weekend of the season. But Clemson's 10-8, just like Pitt. Obviously, they have a tiebreaker. Syracuse is 11-8. They also have a tiebreaker. Neither one of those teams is going to fall behind Pitt. unless Clemson loses out and Pitt wins out. That could possibly happen. I guess, yeah, record-wise. But those two teams will both hold a tiebreaker over Pitt. So that's not really something that doesn't work in Pitt's advantage. Other notable games tonight, Wake Forest is hosting Georgia Tech. Wake Forest is 10-8 right now. Virginia Tech's 8-10, just sort of barely hanging on outside that spot where Pitt is as far as the 2 games ahead or behind. They'll be at Louisville tonight. But for Pitt, I think they're really at a point. I think there's some bubble teams you would like to see take a loss to help Pitt's case, but Pitt's really at a point right now where they are more or less in control of their destiny. I think. Keep winning. Win these last 2 regular season games and then go make some noise in the ACC tournament. We'll see. Starts tonight. And I think they got a lot of momentum coming out of that game on Saturday at Boston College. Carry that into tonight's game, beat up on Florida State, and then move on to NC State and look to finish strong, which they've been playing really well lately. So Pitt has. So they should be able to they should be in good shape to finish strong. All right, big game tonight for sure. Looking forward to that one. We'll see what happens. Make sure you stay tuned right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com to get all the post-game coverage. And then, of course, right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com for all of the all of our other post-game coverage. We'll have videos, we'll have write-ups, we'll have breakdowns, all kinds of stuff. Right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and right there, Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe. And that way you won't miss any of our Pitt videos. Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you had a good Monday. Enjoy the game tonight, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.